Hey everybody, welcome back to Art by Galen. My name is Galen Eilenfeld, and welcome back to Creating Comics Start to Finish, which is my series that teaches you how to create your own comic books from the very beginning, conceptualizing your ideas, all the way out through getting it into print and getting it into the hands of your readers. Before we get started today, I want to take a moment and thank our sponsor, and that is ComixWellSpring. ComixWellSpring is a comic book printing company. They also print lots of cool accessories and other little things that can go along with your comics and for your booth merch and things like that. If you've purchased any of my books, whether that's the Creating Comics workbook that goes along with this series or any of the issues of Baku Dreamwalkers that I've done so far, all of them have been done and printed by ComixWellSpring. I've been using them for years. I'm extremely happy with the quality that they produce, and their customer service is amazing. And on top of that, you only have to get a very small order of 25 copies of your book to put in an order. So it makes the barrier to entry pretty low and quite awesome for indie creators like us. So whenever you're ready to print your next comic book, check out ComixWellSpring.com, and here's a code that you can use to get a little discount off your order. In this video, we're going to talk about inking your pages. We're going to assume that you've already done the pencils on your page. You're ready to start laying down the actual ink work. Now, there's a few different ways that you can go about doing this, and there are a lot of different tools that you can use. There are markers, brushes, different types of dip pens, as well as digital methods of inking your pages. So in this video, I'm going to go over some of those tools. I'm going to demonstrate them a little bit and show you how they work, what they do, and what they won't do. I'm going to share some of the tools that I use for my comics, and hopefully give you a little insight on how to get started with inking your pages. I do want to note this isn't necessarily a how to draw or how to ink tutorial in this video. It's more of a demonstration and a guide. However, in the future, I will have other videos that'll teach you different methods and techniques for using inks, both traditional and digitally. During this video, you'll see portions of a time lapse of me doing the inks on this page. But before we get into actually laying down inks, let's talk about some of the tools. I do want to start off by saying that pretty much all of the materials and tools that I'm going to be showing today, I have affiliate links down below if you're interested in getting any of these for yourself. Firstly, with doing the inks on your comics, probably one of the most common methods of doing inks is just using fine point markers. I have a set of Copic multi-liners that I really like. They make both the refillable type and then these, which are more of a single-use type. They are cheaper, but they are also a little bit more wasteful because you cannot refill them. But they're the same quality waterproof Copic ink, and that's another important point is whatever inks that you are using, I highly recommend that you use waterproof ink because you're much less susceptible to it smearing or smudging or anything like that as you work on it, or if you decide to go over it with anything else. Now you'll find that these come in various tip types, like there are a more medium-sized tip. This is a 0.5, which is what I generally use for most of my lining if I'm using markers. There are finer points like the 0.3 and the 0.1. There are thicker ones like the point or the 1.0. And there are ultra fine ones like the 0.03. Which is super tiny. The major benefit to using fine point markers is that you don't have to manage ink. You don't have to keep constantly re-dipping your pens or your brushes or whatever. And your line consistency is always going to be the same for the most part. Now, maybe you want that kind of brush varied stroke effect, but you don't really want to use brushes and inks. They do also make brush tip markers where you can get similar effects, where if you use very light pressure, you can get a smaller stroke. But if you increase the pressure as you go along, you can make the lines thicker. And they do make different sizes of these brush tips, that way that you can get different line weights. I don't know which would really be the next most common, but this is definitely my favorite method, and that is just simply using brushes. Now you're going to need some nice smooth fine point brushes. I personally like the ones that have a little bit of a longer head on them, just because I can get nice smooth strokes with them. But if you're using brushes, you're going to need a few other things. You're going to need something to put your ink in. You're going to need some sort of paper towel or something like that to keep your brushes clean. And you're going to need something to put some water in to rinse your brushes out. And obviously, you're also going to need some ink. Just like with the markers and the fine point pens, I recommend a waterproof ink. This is what I use right here. This is Speedball Super Black Waterproof India ink. And this is a big 32-ounce bottle. You don't have to get a bottle this big. I do a lot of inking, so it's cheaper for me to buy a big bottle. And one of the reasons that I like getting a big bottle like that is I can take a smaller bottle like this and I can fill it up and use that. It's got a little twist top. I can use that and I can pour myself some ink when I'm ready to use it, and I'm ready to go. Now, something else that I do is I actually mix up varying strengths of my inks. I have some where I fill the bottles, halfway or a quarter of the way or 10% or 5% or even just a couple of drops. And then I fill the rest with distilled water. And these give me a nice range of gray washes. It's almost like watercolor. If I want to do some line work on something, say, that has a special type of effect, or if it is maybe in the very distance and I don't want it to stand out as much, I'll do it with one of the grays. That way it kind of helps set it further in the background. Or you can use them similar to watercolors and achieve some nice washing, texturing, and lighting effects. Let me know if you would like me to do a video demonstrating how I use these different washes. So when you're using brushes, you're gonna have lots of different types of bristles and things like that. And with them, you're gonna get different effects. Obviously, the bigger the brush with a big bristle, once you get some ink on it, you can actually cover quite a bit of area with it. Like you can get a nice, long, smooth line. You do need to spend some time and kind of play and get used to your brushes and recognize like how long of a line can I do before it starts doing that sort of dry brush effect. If I load it up more, will it let me do more? And how smooth is it? And occasionally you'll get these little hairs that will sort of pop off, and you can either get a tiny pair of scissors or an X-Acto blade or something like that and just trim them up and keep them nice and neat. And then when you're done, you just come over, rinse it out, get all of the ink out of it, and then get the residue and things like that out on your paper towel. And I like to do that a few times until when I finally wipe the brush, there's no more ink coming off of it. And I kind of twist them a little bit to keep that fine point as it dries. Like a finer thickness brush like this one, you can actually do quite a bit with. It's got a very long and fine bristle that way, so you can actually get some really nice long and smooth curves. And just how, you can do many of these very smoothly with this. And because of that long bristle, that gives you extra stability. It doesn't wiggle around quite as much. Now this one has a much shorter bristle on it, and we can still get very fine lines with it, but I would use this more for doing details in a face or something like that. I wouldn't really use this shorter one for doing very long lines because I tend to get more little wiggles and things like that with these shorter bristle brushes. Now, one tool that I don't have are the nib pens, and that's the ones with the metal tips that some artists use for doing the line work on their pages. I've used them before. I just am not a fan personally. There are some people that can make them work absolutely beautifully. I am not one of those people, and so I'm not even going to bother trying to demonstrate how to use it. In theory, the way they work is they have different nibs for different size line weights, and you dip them into the ink and you just draw with them. There are also pens that have ink cartridges that you can plug into them and have a similar type effect. That particular method isn't something that I really enjoyed, so it's not something that I used. Now, if you want to get extra fancy, there are things called glass pens, which are they look sort of like a magic wand. They're actually quite cool, and they're not very expensive. I will recommend if you are going to get one of these, get yourself some very fine sandpaper as well. That way, if you end up having like a scratchy point on the tip of it or something like that, you can very gently use your sandpaper and clean it up. But this works in theory the same way that a nib pen would. It's just, in my opinion, it's a little bit smoother and easier to control. And so what happens is you dip it into the ink and you can twirl it around a little bit. And you'll notice here that the ink rests in those little grooves in the pen. And so this way you can actually just draw with it the way that you would a normal dip pen. You do have to be very careful. You don't want to put a ton of pressure on these because you will snap that little glass tip. That's something you definitely don't want to happen. They're really easy to refill. I haven't had much problem with it like dripping or anything like that. Obviously it will if you shake it sometimes, but you see even here, like I'm having difficulty getting ink to fly off of there. But when I go to draw with it, it's there and it's ready to go. And you can get pretty consistent lines with it as well. There's something oddly satisfying about using these pens. And cleanup with these is super simple. You just rinse them off, and then you take your paper towel and just kind of twist it in there. Make sure you get all of the ink out of it. If it does happen to dry with ink in the grooves, gently let it sit in some water for a little while. Wipe it with a paper towel, and if there are still pieces inside that won't come out, get a toothpick, and you can use a toothpick to clean out the grooves. The wood isn't as hard, and it's not going to damage the glass, but it will get that dried ink out of there. Another tool that I use is actually a water pen, or a water brush, or an aqua brush. I've seen them called a few different things, but essentially it's a little reservoir that you unscrew and you fill it up, normally with water, and then you uncap it, and you've got a plastic bristled brush. I like these for filling big areas because I can fill that reservoir with ink. I haven't had any issues with it drying out on me. This one's almost empty though, so I do need to refill it. But anyways, you just take it and you just start working, and you can start filling in big areas pretty quickly. I wouldn't use it for any kind of like detail work or anything like that, but I will use this for filling big areas just because it's a lot faster for me to work with. They're real easy to clean. You open them up, you can rinse them out. Same thing, you use water, and then you can come back in, refill it, and they're ready to go. We're also going to talk about doing some digital inking, but before we do that, we're going to talk about a few white ink tools. First one that I use is a white gel pen. This is a Uniball Signo. Pretty much any white gel pen will work. Some of them you're going to have better luck with than others. But I like these if I want to do like just quick little lines or reverse hatching or something like that over an existing dark area. Or like, let's say I've got something like an eye or something like that, and I want to quickly add some shines to it. You can do that real easily with one of these. If you don't have a lot of luck with gel pens, you can use Dr. Martin's Pen White ink. This is just a bottle of it. It comes with a little eyedropper. You would use this in the same way you would use a regular black ink. You just take some of this and put it in your palette and work with it the same way that you would a normal brush. So like if we take some here, put a couple of drops. You don't need very much normally unless you're covering big areas. And then whatever brush you're going to use, you get your brush out, load it up, and you would paint with that the same way. I happen to like using this more than I like the gel pens just because I feel like the white on this covers better. If either of these is too light for you, like if they end up looking more gray than you want them to, you can actually thin down a white acrylic paint and get just as nice of an effect. And if you don't want it to be shiny, you can use a white gouache. However, I will note that a gouache, if you've never worked with them before, they will move anytime you re-wet them. So make sure it's the last thing that you do on the page. Now, just as a quick demo, I'm going to pencil out like a little eye, and I'm going to ink it in real quick and show how I would also go about erasing out the pencils afterwards. And I'm just quickly going to ink this up. We'll give it enough time to dry, and then we'll try to erase it, see how it turns out. Personally, when I'm doing ink work, I tend to use the brushes on just about everything other than the faces. When I get into the faces, I usually will switch to the fine point markers just because I want to make sure that my detail stays exactly where I want it to be. And when you're getting into tight little details, the brushes can be a little bit more difficult to control. And so I like to do it this way. Okay, so now we've got this done, and we're ready to start erasing out. In the How to Pencil Your Pages video, I demoed the erasers that I use, but I don't think I explained why I only use these white erasers. And the reason that I use these white plastic erasers is because they're very soft and they're not near as abrasive on the paper or on the inks. These I've had the best luck with, like when I see this is nice and dry now. Whoop, it's not quite dry. Damn. Okay, so I had a little bit too much ink up there, but we're just going to roll with it. I think it's dry now. I goofed that up. Okay, so I had a little blob of ink there that I didn't see, and sometimes that happens. But we're going to go ahead, we're going to erase out the pencils, and we'll see if we can't fix this. So I'm going to use this eraser. And you see it's nice and soft. It's not picking up any of the ink or anything like that. It's not damaging the paper. And you see these little flakes of eraser that come up. That's because the eraser is what deteriorates rather than the paper. Now, we might even be able to pick up some of this with the eraser, but I don't think we'll get very much. But we'll go ahead and go over it just to get what we can. Now, this was not planned. I did not plan to mess this up, but this is a real life thing that happens when you're doing inks. And, you know, sometimes you don't feel like redrawing an entire page to fix one little mess up. So here's what we're going to do. We've got some white ink over here. I'm going to get a little brush. I'll get that same brush that I was using. I'll get some of that white ink. And I'm just going to start covering it up. I'm going to come out here and just brush over my mistake. And I may have to do this a couple of times, but the point is that, you know, it's not about never making mistakes. It's about learning how to go forward even when you do make mistakes, because you will. You will have screw ups. It's going to happen. Hopefully they're not like what I just did, but in the event that it does happen, you can clean it up. You know, we're going to come in here. We're going to put this white ink over it. We'll make sure it's nice and dry. We can still see through it a little bit. And so once it's dry, you know, we'll come in and just do a little bit more on top of it. We'll do that. And I would give that a nice amount of time to dry off before trying to do anything else with it. But I mean, I'm glad this happened though, because, you know, there's a lot of times when people are doing demonstrations and things like that, and they don't really show you what to do if something like that happens when you're working. And rather than edit the video and redo that portion, get a new sheet of paper and draw the eye and until I don't mess it up, I would much rather show you how you can work with what you've got. Okay, so I've given it about 5 minutes. It's nice and dry now. I can run my finger over it without doing any damage to it. Now you can still see through this, and you could take some time and you could touch this up and use more. I'm not going to mess with it just for the sake of this demonstration, but you can easily see how this is going to be much easier to fix and edit whenever you're scanning it and doing the coloring or whatever rendering you're going to do to it, compared to what it was before. And so now that we're at this stage, I can actually come back with my pen. I can add in some of the lines here in between and you know, clean up the eyebrow a little bit. And if I wanted to, I could come back in with that white ink or with one of these white gel pens, and I could put some of those lines back in between the hairs. And again, same thing. If you overdo this, you can let it dry. You can come back and then you can touch it up again with your marker or with your brush, whatever you're using. The main thing is you know, don't don't fret if you make a mistake, because you will inevitably make mistakes. It's all about learning, and it's all about learning what you can do with what you've got. And ultimately, it's about having fun. And really, like, you're trying to tell a story, and stories get their value from the flaws that the characters have, and the flaws of the world that they live in. If everything was perfect and went exactly as planned, it would be extremely boring. And again, this wasn't something that was intentional, but I am very glad that it did happen, because it gave me an opportunity to talk about correcting mistakes and different ways that we can go about it. Obviously, if you're working in a digital media, which we'll demonstrate here in just a second, it's much easier to fix than it is on traditional. Okay, now we're going to talk about doing your inks digitally. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a page from Baku Dreamwalkers issue number 2. I'm going to take a page that I have already done, and I'm going to remove all of the color and text and effects and everything and the ink work, and I'm just going to take it all the way back to just the sketch. So here we can see my rough digital sketch. This is before I started doing my pencils on paper. And you can also see, like, my digital sketches were a lot rougher than they are on paper. On paper, I tend to develop them a little bit more. That way I know more confidently where my details are going to be, because I know that adjusting things traditionally is not near as easy as it is digitally. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the sketch layer, and I'm going to turn down the opacity. I'm working in Adobe Photoshop, by the way. I'm going to turn down the opacity to about half, roughly, and I'm going to make a new layer on top of it. Now, before I start actually doing any lines on this, I want to show you something that I've got that's available for you in my Creating Comics starter kit over on Gumroad. I have a kit over there that has some templates, but it's also got this section of brushes that I call my ink box, where I've got a nice ink brush where it gets thicker and thinner depending on the pressure that you use. This is the brush I'm using most often when I'm doing line work digitally. I'm going to make these brushes a little bit larger so you can see in more detail what they do. I've got the smooth liner. I've got a more rough version of the same one where the edges are a little bit more blobby, like if the tip of the marker or the nib was damaged just slightly. I've got a dry tip liner where the ink is running out, and so you have this kind of dry texture. I have an actual dry brush that literally runs out of ink as you draw with it, if you want that kind of effect. I've got a nice calligraphy brush. I've also got some special effect brushes that I've made. One is like an ink explosion. This is good for doing explosions and burst effects and things like that, but it also follows the path that you draw. And so you can draw it one way and get one effect, and you can go the opposite direction and get a completely different effect, because it reverses the way that it draws. I've got that. I've got a nice little spatter brush. I've got an automatic hatching brush that detects the angle of your drawing pen if the tablet or the screen that you're using has angle sensitivity. This one is nice because you can literally just angle your brush, draw a line, and come up with some really nice hatching. I've also got an automatic cross-hatching brush that just randomly throws in a bunch of hatching. And so you can use this one to fill in areas. You can also use it with a white to kind of blend it even further. And in addition to that, I've also got some custom halftone brushes that I made where you can use these to fill in different halftone colors in your comics. I've got some larger circles, some smaller ones, and then some extra small ones. So you can come up with some really cool things with these brushes. And the best thing is all of these are free in my Creating Comics starter pack over on Gumroad. When you're working digitally, there's really not much else different as far as what you would do on paper. The main difference is that you can zoom in and you can rotate and you can do all of your little details this way and not have to worry about, big ink spills like we did earlier. But there are positives and negatives for both mediums. And the thing is whatever medium you're working in, it's important that you have tools that you like and that you're comfortable using, and that you spent some time really getting to know them and what their capabilities are. I try really hard not to say things like this is the best tool for making comics or this is the best tool for doing an illustration or whatever, because what works well for what I want to make may not be what you want at all. Even my own brush here, I'm not going to outline my comics with this. I'm not going to go through and line my comics with this brush because I don't feel like it works. But that may be exactly what somebody else wants. Same thing with techniques as well, like, not even just tools, but like some people may go through and just like, I'm going to do this really quickly, but like some people may go through and just like, okay, we're going to outline it and we're going to leave it at that. And we're not going to worry about filling in the background with black or anything like that. We'll let the color do that. Or, hopefully the person doing backgrounds or whoever does that will fill it in with something. But, there's also going to be people who swear by having, large areas of black in their inks for a more dramatic effect. And that also helps the inks like stand up on their own without colors. I don't think it really is a situation of where it's right or it's wrong or it's better or it's worse. It's, does it match what the intention is? And if you're finding something works for you, by all means, use it. If you're finding something that a lot of people swear by isn't working for you, don't be afraid to try something else. I think in all honesty, probably my favorite part, I say this about every part of it, but like one of the things that gives me the most satisfaction of the comic creation process is the inking stage. It's one of the stages that I really enjoy. I love kind of the zen of just cranking some music, getting my brushes out, and throwing some ink on the pages and just having fun with it and watching it come together. And even if mistakes happen, like what happened just a moment ago, like it's okay. Like I try to find workarounds, and sometimes you do end up just having to redraw things, and that's completely okay. One of the main things that I want to do with this series is not only like demonstrate how to do these things, but really encourage people to make their comics and to do the things that they are wanting to do, but they're kind of afraid to do because they may feel like they don't have the necessary skill set or have the right knowledge or something like that, like to be able to bring their idea into reality. A few years ago, I was one of those people. Like I'd been an artist for a very long time. I'd had an idea for a comic for a very long time. I would even make excuses to not create my comic. Like I would try to come up with things that were mostly BS, frankly. Like, I would say things like, oh, well, it's boring. You're just drawing the same thing over and over. You're drawing the same characters over and over. And it's just, you can't have fun with that. And it's completely not true. Like you can 100% have fun with it. I was just making excuses because I wasn't comfortable with my ability to regularly and consistently draw people. And as far as everything else, like how to put it together, how to assemble it, what types of word balloons to use, or what types of fonts and text to use, how big do you make everything, what kind of format does it need to be to go into print, all that sort of thing. I learned that by trial and error and by, digging around online, finding templates and, listening to other creators. And what I really wanted to do was take all of that information that I learned and put it into one place. That way, when you show up here and you're wanting to learn how to make a comic book, or let's say you're just wanting to learn a specific part of making a comic book, that information is hopefully going to be here and to help guide you towards getting it done. And I also want to encourage as many indie creators as I can, because indie creators, we're not under the thumb of a company that is going to try to steer our creative work one way or the other based on what they want. And they may have different reasons for doing it. It may be money, it may be their own creative drive, it may be a little bit of control freak type mindset. I mean, it can be lots of different things. It could be complete innocent as well. I'm not saying it's deliberate, but when you're an indie creator and you're making things on your own, or with a team of people that don't have a company or corporation like above you putting their thumb on you, telling you how to do and what to do, you are free to express yourself more naturally and more raw. And I truly believe that the world needs more of that. And again, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for being here and for hanging out. And I truly hope that you're finding these videos helpful. I hope that they're helping motivate you and steer you and guide you in the right direction for getting your comic done. And I can't wait to see them. I hope that whenever you do get them finished and you get them out there, that you tag me and let me know. Tag me and let me know that you got it done or that you're working on them. Let me know that my videos helped, or let me know if you think the videos suck and they need to be better. Like, I want to give the best quality information and guidance that I can. And I'm coming from a position of being a completely, like, not educated, independent creator, independent writer, artist, publisher. All of it is done by me, and I have not been trained in any way to do it. And so what I want to do is try to impart what I've learned to you. But I also recognize that because I am learning mostly solo, that there are inevitably going to be things that I'm doing wrong or that I could be doing better. And so that's part of the whole community aspect of this, is that we can learn and grow together. I want to take one more moment and thank you guys. If you've enjoyed this video, drop me a like down there, leave me a comment, let me know what you're thinking about it so far. And if you have supported me and my work in any way by getting any of my comic books, Bach Your Dreamwalkers, or by picking up the Creating Comics Start to Finish workbook that I put, all of these are available on cwsbookstore.com, and there are links down below for all of them as well. I also want to take a moment and say a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting what I do. And I hope that you guys enjoy the things that I post there. We do regular character art. We do pages from my comics as I'm working on them. And we do some spicy art over there as well if you're into that kind of stuff. Anyhow, thank you guys again so much. I hope you're having a fantastic day. And until next time, keep creating and take care.